Hi all, welcome to vid number 8 of my new series. Like little postcards from John, I'm trying to put a lot of pieces and snippets into a big overall picture. And my studies have always been very grounded in John's writings, along with what's happening on God's clock in the heavens. Even though people are jumping ship from my channel like rats, I am trying to get some of my latest and new information out first, instead of just rehashing all the info that I've put out over the past 5.5 years. I'll keep working on it all as long as I can. Maybe I'll get raptured out of here this month. If not, I'll have to spend more time this fall trying to make some money and less time on graphics and YouTube vids, so I'm trying to work fast right now. I also have to do an outdoor project while the temps drop here next week, so that's going to put a damper on my vid making time. I know a lot of people are over the moon right now about the fall feast days coming up. I've been doing Bible studies on YouTube since the summer of 2020, and I've never seen it like this. When I look at my timeline, I can see why. When I start dropping anchors on my timeline concerning certain events, it's telling me that the final 7 years started back in 2023 on the Christian Pentecost Sunday. And we've got this crazy blood moon coming right up. The moon will be passing through the waters of Aquarius only hours before it turns to blood. I still say it's a spooky one, like a baptism in blood, September 7th, and hitting its maximum at 9/11 Jerusalem time. So let's talk about 9/11. I was studying the conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter because we had a major great conjunction back in December of 2020. And on winter solstice of all days. And winter solstice already has a few key spots on my timeline. The Saturn-Jupiter conjunction was the closest we had since the year 1226, nearly 800 years earlier. So I'm just noting it on my overall timeline in the middle at the bottom. And I also added the Revelation 12 sign back in 2017. It happened 33 days after that first great American eclipse on August 21st, 2017. And I'll be talking a lot more about the Rev 12 sign today and winter solstice. So anyway, I was looking at Saturn and Jupiter conjunctions, because I heard that there was one when the Exodus happened. I didn't find it in Stellarium, but they could have been talking about another year. I've always assumed that the Exodus happened in the year 1446 BC. The numbers all seem to point to that time frame. However, while scrolling through Stellarium, searching for that Exodus conjunction, I came across one of the wildest signs I think I've ever seen on Stellarium. And at one of those conjunctions, too, when Jupiter and Saturn are passing one another on God's clock. They will pass each other, I think, about every 20 years, but not always appearing super close to one another, like in 2020. So I came across this crazy wild alignment back in 1436 BC. When we go into the BC years, we have to subtract a year when using Stellarium, and that's why the timestamp says 1435 BC. What really knocked my socks off was when I looked down at the timestamp and realized that this happened on 9/11 of all dates. The date I've been thinking for years now was the birth date of Jesus in 3 BC. So I'm looking at all these planets gathering and sort of all lined up at the harvest star Spica in Virgo. Even the invisible moon is there. So I realized that what is happening here is that Mercury, Saturn, and Venus have just crossed over the line of Virgo that is between her legs. And on 9/11, Virgo is giving birth to the sun. And I've got my timestamp set to 1 minute to midnight for fun. Aside from the fact that this is such an amazing, crazy alignment, what this means is that during the years that the Jews spent in the wilderness, 9/11 was the date that Virgo gave birth to the sun each year. Let me put in those years to show you. This is 9/11 in 1447 BC. It would have been the autumn before they left Egypt. And this is 9/11 in 1407 BC. It would have been the autumn before Israel crossed the Jordan. So you can see, during the years that Israel spent in the wilderness, Virgo was giving birth to the sun during those years on 9/11 every year. I just find that more confirmation for a 9/11 birth date for Jesus. The sun on the line of Virgo on 9/11 would only be happening during this section of history. I mean, not in over 25,000 years. The sun shifts by 1 day on God's clock every 128 years. So there is a bit of a time span when Virgo would have been giving birth to the sun on 9/11 each year. But still, for it to be happening during the years that the Hebrews left Egypt and headed for the Promised Land is, well, it just feels like more confirmation that Jesus was probably born on 9/11 at the Feast of Trumpets in 3 BC. When you really start looking at things, it seems like the Jews had all the signs in the world of when to be looking for the Messiah. I think most of the temple priests and Pharisees and scribes knew the truth, but they just couldn't deal with letting it all go. Anyway, because of the precession of the equinoxes, our backdrop of stars appears to move very slowly across the sky in relation to the sun. So it's like an added feature to God's clock. Check this out, and I'll show you what I mean. During our current times, and due to the precession, this is where the sun is on God's clock each year on 9/11. This is a screenshot from 2025 on 9/11. And the sun on this day of our current years is around that hind foot of Leo, in just about this spot every 9/11. But this really insane screenshot of 9/11 in 1436 BC, on the 10th year of the wilderness journey out of Egypt, I thought this was just too much. I've never seen anything quite like it in Stellarium, and on such a key date, too. So I thought you might like to see it. Virgo giving birth to the sun on 9/11 with 3 other planets gathered right there too. And even the invisible moon is right there as well. No doubt something big happened that day. So let's take a look at 9/11 of 3 BC, since I seem to be collecting quite a few witnesses pointing to that date, as well as talking about another sort of witness, which was the Revelation 12 sign, and a few more things to that story, which may lead right back to the Saturn and Jupiter conjunction of 2020. So let's make that side loop real quick here. First off, this is the calendar online that I use a lot. I put the web address at the top here. You can go way back in history But for the BC years, you have to subtract 1 year from the year you are looking for and put that number into the search box at the very top. It works just like Stellarium in that sense. The historical year that you are looking for will appear at the top of the calendars, and the matchup between the Hebrew calendar and the Gregorian calendar are side by side and very easy to use. If you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you get all the dates and times of the Hebrew events throughout that year. And at the very bottom, it gives the dates and times of the equinoxes and solstices for that year as well. It all seems pretty accurate with what Stellarium shows too, although I do feel sometimes that the Jews were off by 1 day when it comes to their full moon festival dates. But I guess it's close enough. So, as you can see here, the Feast of Trumpets, or Rosh Hashanah of 3 BC, was on September 10th and 11th. It seems that Rosh Hashanah has always been a sort of 2-day event, because from what I've read about and how it works, is that in theory, when they blow the trumpets at the sighting of the sliver of the moon to announce the new year, they count that day as the first day, meaning they are blowing the trumpets at sunset on the first day. And then everyone parties that night and into the next day to celebrate New Year's. For the Jews, Rosh Hashanah in the fall is the start of their civil new year. It is also the day when they blow the trumpets to announce a new king. So, looking at our calendar here, you can see that the trumpets were blown on the 10th at sundown. This is what Stellarium is showing too. This capture is taken of the sunset of September 10th in 3 BC. This is when they would have sighted the first sliver of the moon. At the moment that the sun sinks below the western horizon, enough so that a tiny sliver of the moon being lit up is able to be spotted. I'll just turn on the horizon line for a second so you can see what I'm talking about. We have the sunset in the west, and probably just minutes before the moon also sets. The moon is possibly still high enough above the horizon to be spotted, and it also has to be illuminated enough to see a tiny sliver of it as well. At sunset this night, the moon was 1.2% illuminated. Most people may not be able to see it unless it is more like 2% illuminated. I think trying to actually sight the first sliver of the new moon to keep track of calendars is mostly a tradition. I think the temple astronomers could easily calculate their new moon and full moon dates, and weren't actually relying on good weather to know what day it was. Now everything is so computerized, they can pinpoint the full moon at any time in history. It would not have been possible to spot the moon the previous day, because the moon would have set in the west while the sun was still in the sky. So at sundown on September 10th, the first sliver of the new moon was spotted, and they blew the trumpets, which ended the day of September 10th, and day 1 of the new year was declared. And they would have been celebrating the new year that night and through the next day. The way I've always felt is that after the trumpets were sounded, Mary went into labor, and Jesus was born sometime that night at the start of 9/11 in 3 BC. And we have quite a stellar lineup for that night too. We've got Jupiter, the king planet in Regulus, the king star of Leo. Mercury and Venus are on the shoulders of Virgo. The sun is on the forearm of Virgo. Same place as it is on October 7th during our current times. And we've got the moon with the star Spica, the harvest star, or also called the ear of grain in Virgo's hand. Wow, the moon, Israel, in Virgo's hand as the sheaf of grain on the night Jesus was born. Now that's prophetic. And this whole lineup is very similar to the Revelation 12 sign of 2017. And it is my belief that John is giving us a lot of signs in the heavens to look for as time markers to know when we are at the end of days. And that's about the time that things were really heating up on our end of days timelines too, back in 2017. So I'm sure everyone is familiar with the Rev 12 sign by now. A great sign in the heaven, a woman arrayed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And being with child, she doth cry out, travailing and pained to bring forth. That was from Young's literal translation, which I've been looking at a lot lately. So this sign happened on the third day of the Jewish New Year. And that year in 2017, just 2 days earlier, they were blowing the trumpets that marked the end of the year 5777 for the Jews. And the 777 number is about fulfillment and completion. John writes that this great sign was a woman arrayed with the sun. That's because before sunset, when the sun was still out, Virgo was not visible in the sky. During the day, the sun puts a veil over our eyes, and we can't see all the stars in the heavens. So I think that's why John wrote that Virgo was clothed with the sun. The moon is definitely under her feet, and everyone says that the 12 stars crowning Virgo's head are the stars of Leo, plus the 3 planets that we see lined up in Leo. I feel it is also about the 12 tribes of Israel, since they are a big part of Revelation. And we know that the woman of Revelation is also Israel. And she's travailing in birth with the king planet Jupiter, which had been bouncing around in her belly for about 9 months. And here's the 2 stellarium captures side by side, so you can see how similar they are, with 3 planets below the sun. On 9/11 of 3 BC, the king planet Jupiter was in Regulus for Jesus' birth. And in the Revelation 12 sign of 2017, we have Virgo travailing in birth with Jupiter. So while we are looking at the Revelation 12 sign, I also wanted to add to the story, and that is, I do not see that conception comet coming from Leo and into Virgo as being the real seed, if you know what I mean. That comet was like some supernatural event, but it also happened on November 17th the previous year, back in 2016. That was 310 days before the Revelation 12 sign. And most of those people were saying that the birth of Jupiter happened on 9/9 of 2017. Which technically, maybe that is the date that Jupiter crossed that line between Virgo's legs. Well, I just looked, and yet another surprise. Technically, it looks like Jupiter was actually birthed or crossed that line of Virgo on 9/11 of all days, back in 2017. But during the Rev 12 sign, Jupiter was technically between the legs of Virgo still. All the 9/11 witnesses or confirmations about this being a key date just keep adding up. Anyway, unless Virgo was impregnated with two seeds, one from comet conception and one from the moon, I want you to consider this one too. Most everyone knows the date of the Rev 12 sign. And I just showed you how it really seemed to point to the 3 BC Rosh Hashanah date of 9/11 too. So if we look back 9 months from the Revelation 12 sign, from September 23rd back to December 23rd of 2016, this is what we get. Well, it's actually a 9-month or 275-day count, instead of the 280-day count for gestation. But much better than the conception comet when looking at the Rev 12 sign. Around the start of December 23rd, we have the moon squarely on that line of Virgo, right between the legs, and you can see Jupiter in the womb there, where it will remain bouncing around in that area of Virgo for the next 9 months. Since the moon represents Israel, I feel it is the moon that is attempting to bring to birth a Messiah. And at the same time, we can see the sun in his winter solstice tabernacle. Winter solstice in Jerusalem was just after noon on December 21st that year, just a day and a half earlier. And winter solstice is when it appears that the sun stands still on the horizon at sunrise for about 3 days. Winter solstice always reminds me of Psalm 19, where it says that God has set a tabernacle for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber, and rejoices as a strong man to run a race. I always feel that this is when the days are at their shortest, and then the sun appears to stand still for 3 days, as in his tabernacle, resting. After winter solstice, the sun once again begins to increase as the days get longer and stronger as summer solstice approaches. The sun coming out of his chamber as a strong man to run a race. Then, as winter sets in and the circuit or race is run, the sun winds down and the days get shorter and shorter until he goes into his tabernacle at winter solstice to rest again. So exactly 9 months before the Revelation 12 sign, we've got the sun still sort of in his 3-day tabernacle at rest, while the moon, Israel, is trying to conceive Jupiter and a Messiah. Since I feel that these are pretty secure anchors on my timeline, I'm going to also add a little Virgo symbol to winter solstice of 2016, so I know it's connected to the Rev 12 sign. So I'm always hesitant to make any real for sure statements about the next 2 verses in chapter 12 of Revelation. I know John is telling us that another wonder in heaven appeared, and I'm assuming that, as in all the other places in Revelation, he is talking about another big sign in the heavens. Looking at Young's literal translation, he's showing verse 1 and 3 as reading almost exactly the same. A great sign was seen in the heaven, and there was seen another sign in the heaven. These both must be signs in the heavens, and I can see how it could be a couple of different things. However, I feel that John is also quickly moving into territory when these signs in the heavens are a reflection of what is happening on earth, and in heavenly realms, so to speak. And then he immediately, in the same chapter, talks about the war in heaven, which I won't go all into now. But in Stellarium, I was following Jupiter out of the womb of Virgo, and remembered that we had that grand conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter on winter solstice of 2020. The closest conjunction in nearly 800 years. And we have the Sun and Mercury at winter solstice together in the tabernacle, where the Sun appears to be at rest for 3 days. It all just feels too familiar, since we have the winter solstice of 2016 directly connected to the impregnation of Virgo with Jupiter in the first place, by the moon Israel. And just as Jupiter is in one way symbolic of the earthly Christ, with his stripes and wound, Saturn has always been symbolic of the earthly Israel, since it is called the star of their Sabbath. Even the Hebrew word for Saturn is where the word Sabbath comes from. For those who don't already know this, I'll just read the brief explanation from the net. The Hebrew word for Saturn is Shabtai. The name is derived from the word for the Jewish Sabbath, Shabbat, and is related to the astrological tradition that associates the planet Saturn with the seventh day of the week. Here's a breakdown of the connection. Shabtai. This is the Hebrew name for the planet Saturn. Shabbat. This is the Hebrew word for the Sabbath, the holy day of rest. Saturday. The English name for the day of the week is derived from Saturn's day. Connection. The association between the planet Saturn and Sabbath day is a long-standing one, recognized by ancient Roman historians, church fathers, and Jewish scholars. When Hebrew speakers adopted the names for the planets from Babylonian and Greek traditions, they named the planet Saturn Shabtai to acknowledge its connection to their day of rest. I feel that this grand conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn on winter solstice is just a bit over the top, and just exactly something God would do to express a war in heaven, and a battle that is being waged on earth, while the Sun and Mercury tarry in the tabernacle. It also reminds me from video 6. This grand conjunction would have happened only weeks after the date that I had pegged as the baptism. So check this out. We have the April 8th eclipse and the April 8th resurrection date in 30 AD. If Jesus' ministry was 1,260 days, or the biblical 3.5 years, then he would have been baptized on October 26th of 26 AD. So also with corresponding to our 2024 April 8th eclipse, the baptism and the 1,260 days would have started back on October 26th of 2020. The race of the 1,260 days that Jesus had to run for his ministry, from his baptism to the resurrection, which also gives us the starting point for the race of the 1,600 furlongs that John talks about at the end of Revelation chapter 14, that I went over before. The race that ended at the blood moon on 3/13 this year. And then we have this war in heaven with the showdown of Jupiter and Saturn at winter solstice, less than 2 months after this baptism date on the timeline in 2020. I did a search for the word race in the entire KJV, and it only appears 4 times. And one of those times is what I was just mentioning in Psalm 19, that I was saying I felt was about winter solstice. It just feels too coincidental. I think the races really got started back in late 2020. Well, there was a lot going on in the world back then too. I'm sure everyone knows what I'm talking about. Then, right at the final 40 days of the race of the 1260 days to the April 8th eclipse, we had the 7 vials of wrath getting filled from Revelation chapter 14 and 15, a perfect finish line for the 1260 days. Then John tells us of the race of the bloody 1600 furlongs, blood to the horse bridles, which was the race from the baptism all the way past the April 8th eclipse and going until the blood moon of 3/13/2025. A race from the baptism date to the blood moon of 3/13. It's just too much with this very next blood moon getting a baptism in the waters of Aquarius, only hours before turning to blood. See, it's just stuff like this that totally freaks me out and keeps my mind spinning on all this stuff. So we have another one of those bloody moons coming up on September 7th, on Sunday. I doubt I'll get another video out before the blood moon. I'll have to regroup my thoughts here on what videos to work on next. I could try to run through all the signs in the heavens before getting back into the events in the Gospels and symbolism type studies. That way everyone could get a good idea of all the anchors on my timeline. Obviously, some of these blood moons and solar eclipses are huge anchors that I'm not going to be able to pick up and move. It's why I'm saying that if there is one small facet or day count that ends up being off, it's not going to change all that I'm seeing, because so many of these points on the timeline have so many references or connections to them. A lot of people are talking about a rapture event in less than 3 weeks. Most of them are looking at September 23rd at Rosh Hashanah, Feast of Trumpets. This whole fall feast season usually gets a lot of attention. Any way you look at it, this should be a September to remember.